Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, all about the very engaging topic of compliance. It's going to be an enthralling presentation, I'm sure, but one we all need to be aware of. So thanks for everyone that's joined. We are going to spend a few minutes just waiting for a couple more people to join, and then we'll introduce you to the panel. So if you guys could come onto the screen for us, we'll introduce you and get started. Oh, there they are. So today you'll be joined by an exceptional panel of property professionals that we have here at Centric. So if I introduce you guys, so we've got Stuart, who's our sales and lettings director. Stuart looks after our high street offices and all of our kind of sales and lettings team. We've got Mike Navarro, who's our lettings manager here in Birmingham, which is our kind of Centric HQ. So Mike's the lead there. We've got Freen, who's head of group lettings, so looks after everything compliance, legislation, training, etc. And then we've got Ellen, who's also a team leader in our tenancy management team. So we've got a huge amount of experience across our hosts and panelists today. So thanks for taking the time out, guys, and joining us. So today what we're going to cover, we just skip onto the agenda. So we're going to do a little bit of a property market update, what's new in the industry, etc. We're going to talk about selective licensing. So some of you on the webinar will have been through this process recently, whether it be Nottingham or in Birmingham, our two main areas that have recently introduced selective licensing. We're going to talk about all the major compliance areas, so gas, electric, fire safety. There's a lot of legislation that's changed over the last few years, so try and bring everyone up to speed on that. We're going to talk about sustainability. So there's been quite a bit of change recently. You'll have all seen Rishi Sunak's update about EPC legislation, which I think is a real positive for landlords in the market, but actually was a real unexpected U-turn. But one I think we're all very pleased with. But we'll talk about greener properties and sustainability of those properties and what tenants are looking for. And then we'll talk about long-term legislation and concrete compliance. And then at the end, we've got some Q&A session. What I would say on each of those sections, if you've got questions, do please put them in. We've got our glamorous assistants in Kelly and Rachel behind the scenes who will take those and present them to us at the end of each section. So please don't wait to the end if you've got any questions. But if you do, we've got a section at the end specifically for Q&A. Okay. So why is compliance important? Again, a lot of landlords what we find, particularly if they manage it themselves, can bury their head in the sand. But ultimately, there's a lot of fines out there available if you are non-compliant with some of this legislation. And for some really extreme cases, there's actually jail time that can be imposed. So they are really serious legislation matters, and ultimately we're talking about tenants and safety. The second thing is you want happy tenants in today's market. There's a lot of property out there for them to choose. There's a lot of competition. For private landlords, a lot of competition against big blue chip companies now that are producing build to rent developments. So for you to be able to keep up with those and entice tenants to come and live in what we call PRS, which is private rental sector, we need to make sure that you're compliant. We need to make sure that the tenants feel happy and safe in their property for themselves and or their families. So that's going to lead to future-proofing your property, making sure that it's operating efficiently, you get the right values for your property, and ultimately your tenants stay longer, which is a real important factor into ultimately managing an asset, which is a buy-to-let investment. So quickly then, a bit of a market update. There's been a lot of ups and downs over the last year, I would say, in the property market in the UK. From coming through and out the back of COVID, the market just exploding, prices going through the roof, to a few outside factors coming in. We won't talk about government, but ultimately leading to high inflation and interest rates, Bank of England raising their interest rates over the last, I think it's been 14 raises in a rise until last month. So a lot's been going on. Property prices have definitely cooled. I think the latest stat from JLL has been year to year, August to August, 22 to 23, has seen near a 5% reduction. Now, what we're saying to people is, look, that actually the market couldn't continue at the speeds it was increasing at. It was an unrealistic market for 2 to 3 years. and actually what it was doing is putting properties out of reach of people. It needed to cool, it has cooled, and prices are either stabilising or reducing anywhere between 1 to 5%, depending on the location that you're in the UK. So interestingly though, Rightmove have reported this month that their average asking price, and bear in mind that is asking price, has actually increased from August to September by 0.4%. Not a lot, but it could also be a fact that not many properties came to the market in August, given it was the summer and holiday period, and we do always see that trend. So Rightmove are reporting a slight increase on the average list price. Going to the rental market then, so there's 20% higher volume of rental properties available for people than this time last year, which is a positive in the supply and demand market. But equally, the same stats suggest that you're 30% below the average for this time of year over the last period. So take from that what you will, but rental market is still extremely strong. I'm sure the guys, when they come on, will back us up on that. Rents, depending on where you are, have increased anywhere from 5 and in some cases 10% over the last 12 to 18 months. So I think buy-to-let and investment is still very much in people's agenda and on their radar. Sources are suggesting that the average UK rent is just over £1,260. I think in Birmingham, the most recent stat I saw was closer to £1,400 per calendar month. So you can see rents are on the rise across the UK. And I mean, just to give you an example, there's 4.6 million households in private rented sector at the moment in the UK. So it's not a sector that's going anywhere, and I think the buy-to-let market will continue to be strong for the coming years. If we just move on to the Renters Reform Bill, which is in the media a lot at the moment. So it's been talked about for the last 12-18 months. We had the first reading in May in Parliament. You can see a bit of a roadmap there. There's another reading expected late October in Parliament. What this is going to do, so some of the key things you need to be aware of are the abolishment of Section 21s, which for those of you that don't know, is the notice a landlord can serve to get the property back or to get the property vacant. So this reform bill will mean that you won't be able to serve notice on a tenant without real explicit reasons you're looking to sell the property or need it back for financial reasons, which ultimately will mean every tenancy will move into a periodic status. So there'll be no fixed term. Currently and traditionally, you've done a 12-month fixed term, and then you'll either renew that or you'll roll into a periodic. What the reform bill is suggesting that all tenancies will be periodic and ultimately will give the power of the decision when the tenant leaves over to the tenant. There will be stronger grounds for possession from the landlord's perspective, particularly with unruly tenants, so bad behaviour, rent arrears, etc. So some of that power will be increased for the landlord, which is a positive. And some things again to help tenants enjoy their life a bit more in the property. You won't be able to ultimately say no to pets without a real solid reason behind it. One of those big reasons, if you are in a leasehold block, is something like the head lease suggests that there's no pets allowed. But all these things, as it becomes more clear and heats up, we'll do more sessions like this on the Renters Reform Bill. But I think the expectation at the moment is this might hit the market in 2026. So a lot of groundwork to get through to get there, I think, as you'll see from the roadmap. But it will soon be upon us. So we'll keep you posted on that. I'm going to hand over now, I think, to Mike, who's going to talk us through selective licensing, what it all means and why it's important. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Andy. So yes, selective licensing, how has this come about? So since the introduction of the Housing Act in 2004, under Section 80, local councils have the legal power to introduce a scheme in their area. They must consult residents and ensure that the scheme is justified. However, the council can't just justify the scheme to introduce it. They also, if the scheme covers more than 20% of the properties in that area, seek approval from the Secretary of State. The selective license requires landlords within certain wards to obtain a license as a prerequisite to letting out a privately rented property. The purpose of the scheme is to improve the quality of private rental sector properties. The scheme is intended to ensure that tenants have the peace of mind that the properties they are considering renting are compliant and within building health and safety standards. Now, the cost of this to landlords is dependent on the local authority. However, the average cost is between £600 and £800. In Birmingham, for example, it is £700. Now, that lasts for 5 years, and it is a one-off cost at the outset. Now, where the councils are using this, they only operate across 20% of councils at present. You can see some of them there on your screen, but some of the main hubs, obviously Birmingham, Manchester, Newcastle, Oxford, Bristol, and more. It's more commonly found in London, currently enforced there in 22 of the 32 boroughs. However, as you can imagine, this is constantly changing as councils enter into discussions about expanding it. We are going to run a quick poll that should be popping up on your screen any second. That's just asking if you think selective licensing will have a positive impact on the market and obviously for tenants as well. And also we're going to open up the floor if there's any questions. I don't know if any to come forward, or you've got a second now to put those on. Okay, interesting. And 77% believe no, the license won't have a positive impact. Hopefully you don't think it will have a negative impact. Maybe stay more equal. Any questions?
Yeah, so we have got a question here, Mike, from Jennifer, who has asked if, are you feeding back the issues you have concerns over and the issues with selective licensing that your clients have to Birmingham Council? I'm talking about how the scheme has been implemented, is being run, and how they intend to deal with landlords who have not applied as the application date has now passed.
I'll deal with the first bit first, if that's okay. So we have been in a lot of contact with the council actually since they sort of started letting us know how it's going to work out. So we've had quite a good bit of communication with them throughout the process. Luckily for us as a business, we have dealt with this in Nottingham because we have quite a large portfolio over there as well. So we've been able to use some of that to be able to tackle certain scenarios that come up. As a lot of landlords know, the situation with license has changed in what you need to do to get it and the timescales and things like this. So we've been able to deal with that side quite well. I didn't get the second part of the question though, sorry. Are we feeding back?
Yes, so feeding back on how it's been implemented, how it's being run, and how it's kind of going to progress for those who haven't applied now that the application's passed.
Okay, for those that haven't applied, I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, all of our landlords have applied unless they've got an exemption because they're selling the property. Otherwise, everyone we have on our books have applied. You know, the fines are quite grave with this, so our advice to all our landlords has been to apply as soon as possible. We will feed back to the council as the process goes on. As you can imagine, as the cut-off date was only in September, on September the 4th, there's around 50,000 properties that fall into this in Birmingham. So the council are probably going through the process of that at the moment, which will take some time. So until we see a little bit more, you know, them being passed and processed or not, we'll be able to feed back a little bit more. So at the moment, it's probably too early in the day to assess.
Thanks, Mike. We've got another one here, which is actually along the lines of what you were just talking about. So Phoebe has asked, what is the average processing time on the licensing application? I've submitted the license in June, but haven't heard anything further from the council. I'm guessing that's a kind of expected.
Yeah, I expected with the numbers involved. It's quite strange. We've had landlords who, you know, we've put, you know, have a portfolio of say 10 and one comes back really quickly, then the others come through in a batch and then others don't. So who knows if they're doing it in alphabetical order or if it's just, it's definitely not first come, first served. So yeah, I can't advise Phoebe, I'm afraid. We just have to wait and see. But yeah, I think there's a bit of a delay there.
Thank you. And then just a final one on selective licensing. So how long will my license last and when do I need to renew it?
Okay, so the license lasts for 5 years. At the moment, the council haven't said they will be renewing it, but as we've just found in Nottingham, where the license, the first 5 years has just come to an end in August, they have of course renewed it, and everyone who has a letting property there has to renew that for another 5 years. So as you can imagine, I'm sure Birmingham will do the same, but at the moment they haven't officially said that. So the initial license will now take you for a 5-year period, and then we'll reassess when that comes.
Thanks, Mike. I think that's everything on selective licensing.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I'm going to pass over to Elle, who's going to talk all things gas, fire, electrical safety, and some more compliance.
Thanks, Mike. So yeah, it seems like an obvious area to make sure that you're compliant in, but there are several legislations, certifications and safety checks that we as landlords must abide by. These include annual safety inspections to making sure that we're up to date with the fire safety regulations, and it's important to ensure that we are compliant to avoid large fines and potentially even prison time, as Andy mentioned at the start. A gas safety inspection or certificate, it's a compulsory test that proves your gas supply and relevant appliances are safe. These are every 12 months by a registered engineer, they must be done, and we need to supply tenants with those 28 days of the renewal. With electrical certificates, so EICRs, that came into place on the 1st of April 2021, which made it a legal requirement to new and existing tenanted properties to assess the safety of the electrical installations throughout the property. Includes fuse boards, protective bonding, lighting, sockets throughout the property to make sure that they're all working and up to standard. All properties must have a satisfactory rating. If the report comes back unsatisfactory, there will be remedial works required in the form of C1, 2 and 3. And as it kind of explains itself, C1 obviously more urgent, and as it goes on. The necessary works do need to be done within 28 days of the certificate coming back, which leads us then on to PAT testing. So although it's not currently a legal requirement, it is certainly good practice, and we do encourage it to be done, especially where landlords are supplying, for example, fridge freezers, washing machines, even down to smaller things such as kettles and bits like that. So then smoke and carbon monoxides. The amendment to previous regulations came into force 1st of October 2022, which requires landlords to provide a smoke alarm and carbon monoxide alarm on each story of the building. Carbon monoxide needs to be in any room with a solid fuel burning appliance, for example, a log burning fire, if you've got the luxury. HMOs are slightly different, and they do require an added measure of providing smoke, fire alarms and fire extinguishers, but we won't go too much into that. As I say, PAT testing, gas safety tests and EICRs, all important measures must be undertaken to make sure that you're all compliant, but it does mean as well tenants have a responsibility whilst they're in the property to make sure that they are fire safe and mitigating any risks. EPCs, so energy performance certificates, we'll move on to. So we were due to talk about the changes that were coming in, which were scheduled by 2025, where all new tenancies must have an EPC rating C or above. And by 2028, all tenancies, new and existing, would need to meet those requirements as well. However, with the upheaval of the UK sustainability targets, the Prime Minister has now scrapped that plan, but sustainability is still an increasingly important aspect for landlords to consider with their properties and prospective tenants. And there should be some figures coming up on the screen now, just to show sort of what landlords and tenants are thinking about and what they've fed back with. And then we will move on to a poll. So what do you think? Should landlords be striving to create greener properties despite the legislation being scrapped? Just wait for everyone to feedback on that. Brilliant. So yeah, I think it's a big thing within the UK and the world at the moment, obviously with sustainability and being more green. So yeah, that's good to hear. And then any questions on any of that?
Yep, so we have got a couple of questions. Let me just get them open. So we have one here. Do you actually have to supply a cooker in a property as a standard, or is a landlord only legally required to supply a safe gas supply into the property in order for the tenant to attach their own appliance to?
I do believe that you are required to provide a form of cooking. So we'd have to double check whether that is illegal, but I'm of the understanding that yes, you do have to provide a means of cooking for the tenants.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another one here. If I have a gas appliance in my kitchen, do I need both a carbon monoxide detector and a fire alarm?
Yes, so with any gas appliance, you will need a carbon monoxide alarm within the area of that, as well as a smoke alarm.
Okay, and we have a question around the clarity on greener properties. So what are we classing as greener properties?
So again, the EPCs will go back to, so anything C or above, making sure that the ICR is at a satisfactory rating and that any remedials are done. Big subject, you know, you can go into the installation of the property, making sure of that, but again, that is all covered within the EPC, and there are recommendations on those even if you are at a C level. So if you wanted to make your property greener, then you could go off those guidelines and recommendations as well to make it even greener.
Well, thanks, Al. I think we're ready to move on.
Lovely. Okay, and I'll pass along to Afreen, who will be going through concrete compliance and long-term regulations. Thank you.
Hey, Afreen, I think your mic's still on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Yeah. So sorry, I was saying that leads us nicely onto some concrete legislation, not literally, but some long-term regulations and legislations within the industry. I'll start off with right to rent. So right to rent checks are an essential part of the tenant screening process. The checks help us prevent illegal immigration and protect landlords from potential penalties. Landlords must ensure they are rented to tenants who have the legal right to rent within the country, and if a landlord is found to be rented to someone who doesn't have the right to rent, unfortunately will be liable for a penalty of up to £3,000 per tenant. Moving on to deposit protection and registration. Deposit protection is a vital aspect of renting for both landlords and tenants. All assured short-hold tenancies within England and Wales require landlords by law to protect their tenants' deposits within a government-approved deposit protection scheme. This ensures that a tenant's deposit is safeguarded throughout the tenancy period. We'll now shed some light on anti-money laundering requirements for landlords. Landlords have certain obligations under money laundering regulations. These regulations require landlords to identify and verify the identity of their tenants to prevent money laundering activities. By conducting due diligence checks and maintaining accurate records, landlords contribute to the prevention of financial crimes. Agents must also complete AML checks on landlords. Next, we'll move on to Legionnaires. So as a landlord, it's essential for landlords to understand their duties in regards to Legionnaire's disease prevention. Legionnaire's disease is a potentially fatal form of pneumonia caused by bacteria in the water systems. Landlords are responsible for conducting risk assessments and implementing the appropriate measures to minimise the risk of Legionella bacteria. And then we'll move on to the right to rent guide. Another form of legislation within the industry. The How to Rent Guide serves as a valuable resource for landlords and tenants. It provides essential information about the rights and responsibilities of both parties during a tenancy. Landlords must provide their tenants with the most up-to-date version of the How to Rent Guide at the beginning of the tenancy. And then lastly, we'll move on to the Housing Health and Safety Regulation System. This system is used to assess the potential risks and hazards presented within the rental properties. Landlords have a legal obligation to ensure that their properties meet the required HHSR standards, and they can do so by complying with the rating systems which are in place. So to summarise, understanding property legislation is crucial for landlords in order to operate within the law, and also to provide a secure and safe rental property for their tenants. I will now pass you over to Stu to take any questions we may have received.
Thank you, Farina, appreciate that. I think as we can all see from the conversations that have gone on each slide, just how important compliance is. As landlords, really, you've got to look at the bigger picture. Compliance will ultimately help you avoid fines, help you avoid that potential jail time, which has been sort of bandied about, which is a real thing. But it also help keep your tenants happy and safe. And with tenants that are happy and safe, that will ultimately mean that you have no future potential issues and problems that might occur, causing you more money and distress as a landlord. The key really here is that what we're trying to do as a company is trying to avoid your void periods and ultimately maximize your return on your investments, which as landlords, that's ultimately what it's all about. So compliance, although it's a tricky subject and also quite a challenging subject, it just goes to show just how ultimately important it is to ensure that your homes are compliant and they're meeting the obligations and legislations that's in the UK today. What we'd like to do is open questions up. So if you have any questions, please use the chat features. If you'd like to fire any questions into me, that's absolutely fine. I'm happy to take those.
Thanks, Stu. So we have got a couple here to run through. So first one, and obviously anyone on the panel who's ready to answer these, feel free to jump on. My building is undergoing cladding works. How will this impact me as a landlord?
Yeah, it's very prevalent in today's market, especially with the Building Safety Act, which has been in place. Cladding works that have been ongoing now for the last 3 years plus, really, since Grenfell disaster. It is causing problems in the market, but more importantly, it's our obligation as agents to ensure that the tenants are aware of any cladding works that are to be done at a building. So, for example, if they aren't, there are no cladding works there, but then when they move in, there's scaffolding goes up, the building gets wrapped. Essentially, they have a complete change of standard of living, if you like. So it's really important that we're aware of that. And as a landlord, if you are self-managing, it's really important that you're also aware of your building. It can ultimately have an impact on your potential rent, and it might be something you want to look at as a landlord to discuss. But essentially, that it doesn't really change the ability to rent the property. It just changes the aspect of how that tenant's going to be sat in that home. Hope that answers that one.
Yep, so we've got another one here on compliance bills. So I'm getting hit with compliance bills. Can I pass this on to my tenants?
Good one. Ultimately, no, you can't pass any compliance bills on to a tenant. The only way that could happen is in the event the tenant actually damages anything to do with the building. That would impact compliance. So if they were to change anything with the electrical board or damage anything to do with that, that would then mean you need to go in and do some further works. You could then evidence that that's been caused by tenant damage, and then obviously you could go down that route. I think that's my understanding. I'm happy to open up to the panelists if I'm not right there.
I think maybe they're referring to selective licensing, EICRs coming in over the last year or two, basically landlords being hit with more costs these days. But I think what our opinion of that would be, or how I see it, is you can't directly pass those on to the tenant. It is the landlord's responsibility to cover those upfront costs. But as we're seeing, rents are increasing. And I think part of the reason rents are increasing is because landlords are having to claim some of these things back, else it doesn't become a viable asset. And ultimately, people are in a buy-to-let investment because it's a great asset class. But if the margins are being squeezed, then obviously either rents need to go up or landlords will exit the market. So the quick answer to that is no, you can't directly pass them on, but you should be trying to maximise your asset and get as much back through rent as possible to cover these costs over the next few years.
Good job, somebody was listening.
Okay, brilliant. Was there any more, Kelly?
Oh yeah, so I've got one here on the Renters Reform Bill. So are you as an organisation representing your clients by engaging with Birmingham's MPs and voicing concerns about the real implications of the proposed bill on not just the rental market in this area, but the actual tenant?
Yeah, it's a good question, similar to the licensing one, I suppose. We are trying to communicate with the local councils, the local MPs wherever possible. I think it's a very, very difficult to get any time with them at the moment, given, as Mike said, the selective licensing has been such an intense period. The Renters Reform Bill, yes, we're involved in many questionnaires that come out from places such as Arla, governing bodies, Arla Property Mark. We've got a compliance officer in-house that quite often attends seminars, webinars, etc., to give our viewpoints. There's lots of surveys that happen behind the scenes in the industry as well, that again our kind of senior bodies get involved with. So I think the answer is yes, where possible, and I'm sure that will heat up over the coming months and years. But as you can appreciate, sometimes it is difficult to get the ear of the local council or even above. But a lot of the stuff we're involved with, such as being accredited with Arla, Arla actually represent our views to senior government level. So we will, all the agents that are part of Arla will pass in their thoughts and reviews and feedback, and then Arla actually represent us as agents to government as well. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, Andy. And then we've got a final one here, again about the Renters Reform Bill. So what will happen if I have to move my tenants from an AST to a periodic tenancy when the Renters Reform Bill has passed?
Yeah, you want to get on?
Yeah, I think what will happen, again, none of this is concrete yet, but I think the government will realise that there are fixed term tenancies in play. So at some point they'll draw a line in the sand with a date and say, right, you now can't offer fixed terms, you'll offer periodics. And they'll let the clock run down on the fixed terms. So if you've got 3, 4, 10 months to run on fixed term, once the act comes in, they'll probably let that run down, and then you won't be able to renew into a new AST or a new fixed term. You'll just roll onto a periodic. So I would expect it to be a phased approach, one for new tenancies first, and then secondly for existing tenancies. They've done similar things with other legislation such as EICRs recently, EPCs, etc. So I would expect it to be a two-phase approach. But again, nothing's concrete from government, as it's still got a long roadmap to go before this is released.
Yeah, the proposed date was the 1st of October 2024, I think, for that. And I think exactly that. Any new tenancy would go into the periodic. Anyone that's in an existing would roll through. And then obviously when they go to reapply for that property where they're wanting to stay in, would go on a periodic contract from there.
Okay, good. Anything else coming, Kelly?
I think that's all of them for today.
Brilliant. Okay, guys. Well, thank you for everyone that's attended today. We really appreciate your time. Thank you to all of our amazing panelists and my colleagues. You've all done an amazing job, so thank you very much. Thank you to marketing team, Callie and Rachel, for helping put this together. What we'll do now is we'll send this around to everybody that has or hasn't attended, so you've got a record of it. We'll also put a couple of useful links on Renters Reform Bill legislation, so you can do some reading there. But if anybody's got any queries, what we'd suggest is do get in touch with one of the team, or book a compliance health check with us. So if you're self-managing the property, it's very important that you understand. I think there's over 120, 130 different pieces of compliance and legislation now you or we as landlords have to abide to. So if you want to book a compliance health check, again, please get in touch with us, either at the website, the easiest place, centric.co.uk, or if you've got direct contact with any of the offices, Nottingham, Solihull or Birmingham, then please get in touch with one of the guys there. So thank you everybody for attending, and yeah, hopefully you found that useful. Cheers, guys.